It is common to hear people from LGBTQ community to come out in the open and finally reveal their true sexual orientation and gender identity. What often remains invisible is the fact that there are thousands of Dalits in this country who constantly hide their caste identity out of the fear of being othered. We celebrated our 75th Independence Day just a few days ago, and it is extremely unfortunate that we still live in a country where a considerable size of our population choose to make decisions on the basis of something that is totally social, that is totally a social construction, and that doesn't really exist in the physical reality. And that is something which is called the caste. I feel deeply honored and privileged to be in conversation with someone whom I relate with at a personal level, Miss Yashica Dutt. She is the author of this book that I'm holding right now with me, which is a memoir called Coming Out as a Dalit, where she writes about her caste experience and how she started to hide her caste for most of her student life because of various reasons that we'll discuss in the following interview. And this book is unique for the reason that it addresses topics and issues that are not really addressed when we talk about caste in conventional modes of communications like casual casteism, caste bias, and how caste manifests itself in seemingly progressive, modern, educated, liberal, urban spaces. So I would like to welcome you on behalf of the entire probe team, Ms. Dutt. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we're very glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. It's always a pleasure and joy to speak to students. And I am actually envious. I wish I was as smart and brilliant as you guys are when I was in my college years. So it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So I would start with a very basic question for our audience. You know, it would act as an introduction to the whole discussion. So when you were a kid back in school, when did it exactly hit you that your caste is something that needs to be hidden, that needs to be concealed? It'll be wonderful for the sake of our audience if you could share some anecdotes from your childhood experience that gave you the impression that you would be better off in this world if you do not reveal your caste. The risk of holding up to your true identity is not something worth taking. So tell us about it.
Absolutely. So I think this is an experience that is common to a lot of Dalits, like you mentioned initially, where we are forced to hide our caste. And we are often told by our families to hide our caste, not because they want us to not be ourselves, but because they fully understand that the cost of revealing what our caste is far greater than us being able to fully express our true identities. So, as far as I'm concerned, for me, this goes back when I was really young. In fact, my earliest memories are of my mom and dad telling me that, if somebody asks in school what your caste is, make sure you tell them you're Brahmin, or make sure you tell them you're a Parashar, which is a middle name that my mother's family assumed. And I didn't quite understand why it was so important for me to do that. But I remember coming back from school when I just started going to school, and one of the questions along with, how was the day? What homework did you get? My mom would often ask me, did someone ask about your caste? And invariably, I was in school in the 90s, early 90s. And even then, thankfully, this question wasn't being posed to kindergartners in a very direct and obvious way. But there was this sense that if you were not from a certain caste, and that was something to be ashamed of. I remember even at that age, there would be this idea that, the kids would discuss, I'm from so and so caste, and associate a certain sense of pride with it. And psychologically, how that affects a young child is that when you see someone else associating pride with a certain identity, and you're being told to hide who you are, and you're being told to lie about it, it inherently makes you feel that you're inferior. It inherently makes you feel that you have something to hide, something that is shameful, something that is like you mentioned, you cannot change about yourself. But that is something that the society is not going to accept about you. So you're better off lying about it. You're better off transforming yourself or being like somebody else. And the psychic cost of that, the psychological cost of that burden from a young age is extremely high. And it is something that we fairly don't discuss, especially in Indian societies. We don't talk about the mental burden of being Dalit, especially from a caste like mine, which is a manual scavenging caste, where Bhangi, and I'm from the Bhangi caste, Bhangi, Chamar, Churas, Kaminas from the Muslim community, these are words that are used as slurs.
Yeah.
So when you understand that your identity is a slur, and when you realize that at a very young age, it is an extremely difficult thing to contend with, and it makes it very difficult for you to feel really good about yourself, to feel like you are like everybody else around you. You're always concerned with the fact that you have to make up for something, that if you don't try to be like somebody else, then you're going to be rejected. And that's a really brutal thing for somebody to go through when you're very young.
Yeah, and apart from the psychological trauma, like you started hiding your caste because you saw the kind of toxic environment that was around you, people using caste as slurs, so that automatically, gave you the impression that your caste is something that needs to be hidden. But was there any instance where, someone came to know about your caste and you were eventually, the communication was broken?
Absolutely. This is something I think you're referring to the incident I've mentioned in the book, and I've talked about it at other places. So, I grew up with this idea that this was something to be ashamed of. But thankfully, because I was protected by my class barrier, even though I grew up with a lot of economic hardship, because my father was in a government service, we were able to sort of pretend that we were different from the Bhangis who lived in the bastis, that there was that particular difference that we could tell ourselves, even though it wasn't really true. We could at least make ourselves feel a little better without realizing that the differences are really created by the caste system and that they're not really real. So, I grew up with wondering whether it was really worth hiding my caste, whether all these, restrictions and all these instructions that have come from my family about being very protective, being very secretive about my caste, whether it's really worth it. And I also grew up, in the time of 90s, 2000s, where there was this sense, this false hope that we had, that India is changing, that India is becoming more progressive, that we are heading towards liberal ideals, that, things like caste are something that exists in the past. We were sort of fooling ourselves into believing that we are a post-caste society, and shielded by my relative middle-class privilege, even though it was completely hollow from inside, I foolishly sort of and naively believed that my caste wouldn't matter, especially among my friends. And I remember there was a particular friend of mine, this is something I've talked about before, who I wasn't very close with, but who was somebody I, shared the bus with and came back from school with. I was 15 years old. And this was a well-educated, quote unquote, doctor family. They just moved in the neighborhood, and her parents wanted to sort of wet me out. They wanted to see if I was a nice kid for their daughter to be hanging with. And they called me over for tea one day, and I didn't know that it was an ambush. I didn't know what I was walking into. What I was walking into was a litmus test of where I stood on the hierarchy of the caste ladder. They were trying to figure out if I was high enough for their daughter to be speaking with. And I walked into that ambush. They offered me tea, and they asked me, "So, beta, we're very progressive, but what caste are you from?" And I knew that in that moment, it was like a bomb had detonated in the middle of a room. It was a silent bomb. And that question, for the first time in my young adult life, I was forced to wait very carefully, because as a teenager, I could sort of tell myself that I have this false choice. Why don't I defy what my mother has been telling me? Maybe this liberal doctor family will not care about what my caste is. So I remember that moment so clearly. We were around a round table. I was looking at the floor, and I could feel their eyes looking at me. I could feel their eyes burning into my head. And without looking up, I said, "Hum SC hai," which, the English translation is that I'm from a scheduled caste. I was so ashamed of being Bhangi that I couldn't even say the word Bhangi. I couldn't even say manual scavenging. I could just say that I'm from the broader category of scheduled castes, which, as all of us who live in India know, that scheduled caste is not just one monolith. It is also a descending scale of contempt, as Ambedkar calls it. So,
Yeah,
and if you're a Bhangi or a Chamar or one of the lower castes, then you lie at the bottom. So even within the scheduled castes, being Bhangi is at the absolute bottom. And of course, I couldn't even tell them that. And I just told them I'm SC, and it felt like something shattered in that moment. And it felt like, that this illusion that I had created for myself was broken. And they said, "Oh yeah, we don't mind that. That's great. We believe in the equality of everybody." And I knew, I left very quickly from there. I knew that something had fundamentally changed completely in my life that day, and that I'd made this choice to tell them who I was, and I was going to be rejected for it. And the next day, when I saw my friend, my alleged friend, in the bus, I remember I went up to her and I was like, "Hey, how's it going? How was your day?" And she just looked through me. She looked through me like I wasn't even a person, like I didn't exist. Like, because I had told her that I was SC, not even Bhangi,
yeah.
that I was somebody who was not worth talking to.
And
And that was really my first experience with sort of recognizing the cost of telling people what my caste was.
yes, and the very fact that when people from a lower caste are asked about their caste identity, and when they have to tell their caste, they usually use the category name. They would say, "Oh, I'm from SC. Oh, I'm from ST." They would not directly say the name of their caste. But if people from the general category have to tell their caste, they would say, "Oh, I'm this Brahmin. Oh, I'm that Rajput. I'm this." So
Right, but there's a reason for that, because, for the upper castes, there is a sense of pride.
yeah.
When somebody said, "I am God Brahmin," or "I'm this and that Rajput," or "I'm this Marwadi," or "this Banya," they're saying that because they want you to know that they are better than you.
Yeah.
They think they're superior than you. When we hide our caste, when we say the broader category name, it's because we don't want them to know just exactly how low we are. So that itself, language and words matter. How we communicate really matters. And what this interaction shows is that upper caste people are allowed to have caste pride. They're allowed to feel superior. Whereas we have been told all our lives that we are inferior, and this is something we should be ashamed of.
Yeah. So I was saying, like, as someone who has experienced caste-based bias and discrimination when you were growing up, and as someone who understands the kind of pressure that Dalit students go through, what do you think about the psychological trauma and the mental pressure that these students go through when they study at these elite, upper caste dominated schools? And moreover, more importantly, what do you think, like, how should these people and these students from reserved categories deal with the constant nagging that they receive from their teachers, from their peers, from their friends, when they're out there in the open? They're always told that they are meritless, they are this and they are that, and they are always under this pressure to hide or perform or prove themselves in front of upper caste people. So this amount of hurt and rejection and frustration that they receive from the world all the time for being a quota student, like, what should be the ideal response? How should they deal with it, especially kids at school?
Absolutely. So, I I don't want to be in a position where I can tell people what to do with their lives, because this is a very difficult and delicate decision to make. When you're 14 years old, when you're 15 years old, even if you are a so-called quota student, which is, by the way, reservation is a fundamental right enshrined in the Constitution. And I know that there is a debate going on, but let's not forget that. And I don't even want to get into the whole reservation debate, because every time I have an interview, I speak about it, and that issue is just never going to die. So for people who want to know more, read the book, and there's more than enough literature available supporting reservation. That's just not a conversation we should even be having. But for people for students who are, sometimes they're first generation college students or they're second generation college students, and they feel the extreme pressure and burden of living and surviving in an elite space that doesn't want them. It's extremely it's debilitating, and it breaks you from inside. And for all those people who come and tell you, oh, but you should be strong, or don't allow that to break you, they're really ignoring what the trauma that brings to be in a space that doesn't want you. And this is very different from being from an economically impoverished background, or being from a so-called poor background, being from an economically exploited class. It's very different, because that can change when you have money. You understand that you're a poor person today, and when you graduate from college, you might be able to get a job where you earn a salary, and suddenly all of that would melt away. Nobody will really remember you as that poor college kid. But if you are somebody who is a so-called quota student, who is a Dalit student, who is an Adivasi student, you will always be made to feel that you don't belong in that space. That shame and stigma that is attached to you is not going to go away just because you have a little money. And this is also the argument that is used against kids who are from middle class Dalit families, that, why do you need reservation, or what do you have to worry about? Now you have money. It's like making an argument that if you're a black person, you will not be discriminated just because you have money, or just because you have a certain amount of wealth accumulation, a certain amount of capital. So the trauma that these kids go through, not only with their friends who constantly tell them that you don't belong here, but also with their teachers who give them deliberately low scores because they see that they have availed the quota and they feel that they don't deserve to be there. This whole idea that you not only just college itself is a very hard experience. You're a young adult. You're preparing for the rest of your life. On top of that, you have to overcome the stigma and bias that you don't belong there. And you have to prove everyone wrong. And in case you fall short of that, other people, if you're a general category student, you're allowed to fail. You're allowed to do badly in an exam. You can say, oh, I stayed out, I partied, I didn't do well this semester. If you're a Dalit student, you're an Adivasi student, you're taking reservation, you don't have that cushion. You do badly once, for whatever reason that is, the label will be given to you that you're talentless, you're meritless, and you don't belong there in the first place. And those are realities that we should be talking more than we're already talking about. And this is the kind of trauma that leads students to commit suicides. Dalit students committing suicides has been a news story for several years now. And thankfully, a lot of us are paying attention to it. So now coming back to your question of how do students deal with it, I would say the best thing you can do if you're a Dalit student, you're an Adivasi student, is to empower yourself and empower your own idea of who you are. Read Ambedkar. Read these ideas about merit and reservation and constitutional rights. Educate yourself. Ambedkar always says, educate, agitate, organize, right? So those are words that we use, but really understand what he's trying to say is what you need is the power of knowledge on your side. When somebody tells you you are meritless, you are talentless, and you don't belong here, you can counter them and be like, explain yourself. What do you mean I'm meritless? And then hit them with arguments. Make them look like the stupid, bumbling fools that they are for even having that idea that reservation is some kind of false myth. These are just perpetuated ideas. People have never even made an attempt to explore them. Nobody understands what they're talking about. Show them why they're wrong. And when you make them look like absolute fools, then you will understand that there's really nothing to the basis of what they're saying. Now, of course, there will still be systemic casteism. There will still be teachers who are out to get you. There will still be professors and school administration who will discriminate against you. In order to safeguard yourself, make sure you organize yourself. There are so many examples of wonderful student societies, much like yourself. In IIT, we have different student societies where Dalit and Adivasi students have banded together. In JNU, we have seen examples. So join, seek out people like yourself. There is strength in numbers. And make sure that you have the protection that you need. Make sure that you don't think that you're alone, because you're not. And first of all, it's very important to remember that this is not your fault. This is a lie that has been told to you by the society that wants to keep you inferior so that it can keep its hold on the power that they have held for thousands of years. So it's really not your fault. Don't believe that lie.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I'm sure that these advice will help, people from reserved categories go through the kind of casteism that they go through its educational institutions in a better manner. So, Shubodh, you may ask your question now.
Uh, Ma'am, you told about your mother being playing a very important role in your life and the struggle which you went through and how you attained your education and all that. I know she also played an important role in hiding your identity. Was she right when she hidden your identity? And if she had not hidden your identity, how different your life would have been?
That's an excellent question, Shubodh, and I really appreciate you asking that, because this is something that many people have asked me. Some people have tried to, but really this is a delicate question, right? It's also a difficult question because, I'm having to sort of look back at the choices that my elders made, that my parents made, that my mom made. And I'm having to sort of understand whether that was the right decision. But here's what we know about history. Here's what we know about culture. Women, and Dalit women in particular, really don't have any choices. In our societies, Dalit women have no power. So the only way that we operate is through survival strategies. And one of the survival strategies for a lot of Dalit women, for a lot of Dalit mothers across the country, is to do whatever it takes they can do to empower their children, especially their daughters, for them to have a shot at an equal life. And that's exactly what my mother did. For example, her situation would be very different if she grew up in a place where, the ideals of Ambedkar are very cherished. For example, Maharashtra, where this idea that, you're an Ambedkarite, you're, somebody who believes in the ideals of Ambedkar, you say Jai Bhim, those ideas are very common. Let's understand where my mother came from. She came from a really small place next to Muradabad, which is, as we know, is a contested district in Uttar Pradesh. And she got married in Rajasthan, which is arguably one of the most regressive states on all indicators, and was in the 80s and 90s. She literally had no power. The only power that she had was to protect her children from the kind of discrimination and pointed sort of oppression that she had felt herself. And the way for her to do that was to shield us. And her shielding involved asking us to hide our identities. And that's not just her. A lot of Dalit parents in those years made those decisions. And frankly, it's because of her decisions that I'm relatively unscarred right now. I don't have many horrible instances of caste discrimination that left me completely traumatized, is because I was hiding my caste. We can go back in time and debate whether that was the right decision or the wrong decision. But the fact is, it's the only decision she had, and she took it. And as a result, I'm sitting here and I'm able to have a voice and I'm able to speak to you and explain my point of view. So I think it's important to look at the decisions women, and in particular Dalit women take, Dalit people take, to protect their kids in the right context. Where we are in 2021 with the Dalit discourse is very different from where we were in 1991. We were in the middle of Mandal Commission riots. Anybody who was even a pro-reservationist was being discarded, discriminated, being called out, being abused. In an environment like that, in Rajasthan, where already even sending your girl child to school is such a contested issue, the only choice my mother had was to tell me to protect myself. And that's exactly what she did. So I would say, in my opinion, that it was the right decision to make given the time and the place she was in and the choices that she had.
Then, do you think so? Even at the current time, current situation, the parents should protect the child's identity so that they do well in their lives. And
Subodh, see, that is a very personal decision. That is a very sort of difficult decision that only an individual can make. We cannot sit here and tell people what they should do or shouldn't do with their lives. If somebody has to make a difficult decision to make their life even 1% easier, they should do that. If they feel that they're empowered enough to not hide their identity and they're able to support themselves, they're able to support their family, they live in an environment that allows them to exist and survive, then they should then they should talk about who they are. But if that's not the case, then it's a valid argument to hide who you are. I mean, this is not a black and white issue. This is not like what, us telling somebody what life choices that they can make. What we can do is empower them, create an environment of support, create conversations, and create awareness around caste. But it is, I feel, not my place to tell somebody what they should do with their lives. If they feel safer hiding their identity, if the environment around them is so unsafe and insecure, then they should hide their caste. But if not, then they should go ahead and live their truth. But that's a choice only they can make.
okay, what do you think about the current education system which we follow right now in the Indian system, and the various teachings which is being offered to schools and colleges, and also what is your opinion on the curriculum which being followed in Indian education system at schools and colleges, and if and about the upper caste teachers teaching the subject of caste to the students at the universities?
That's such a great question because, if you look at the curriculum and the debates around the curriculum, in some ways, it has become even more regressive than it was 20 years ago. We are now playing with history. We are now changing history. We are now removing mentions of certain historical events. So suffice to say, the narrative that a lot of students who are reading government-issued textbooks, who are reading CBSE board or state boards, they are reading the government's version of history. They're not necessarily reading the truth. That's one of the reasons that when we grew up, especially when I grew up, I really didn't read much about Ambedkar. Ambedkar is a towering figure, as we all know. He played such an important role in shaping India's current history, in shaping our lives. We barely read about him. The way we read about Gandhi, the way we read about Nehru, we didn't read about Ambedkar in the same way. And the way we read about and understood caste. I remember in my civics textbook in 8th standard, there was a little photograph of these deeply impoverished people who maybe were in a rural setting, who didn't have any clothes on their body, and it was a black and white grainy photo, and that small paragraph accompanying that described caste system as something that happened in the past. So if we are telling students that caste system exists in the past, whereas there is somebody around them in the same class who's experiencing it in real time, there is a definite disconnect. So it's an understatement to say that our education system is deeply failing Dalit students, deeply failing Dalit history. This has not changed. In fact, it has gotten worse under the current government, under the various governments, because they've all tried to create their own version of history. But having said that, I think there is a lot of credit that should be given to Dalit students and Dalit folks in general who have been raising their voice and who've been talking about the need to discuss and analyze castes. Like, for example, I just learned that DU for the first time is now going to offer a course on caste and caste studies. I don't know if that's accurate information, but that is something that I've lately heard. And if that is true, then it's a really heartening step. But think about where we are. We're in 2021. We have to convince people that caste exists. So first we have to let them know that this is our reality. And then we can talk about reform. So there's such a long way to go there. But the education system falls extremely short because, like you mentioned, there are upper caste teachers, there are upper caste professors who have this inherent hatred for Dalit students. They have an inherent hatred for quota students. They think they don't deserve to be in an education system like that. So they give us low marks. They try their best to get us out of there. So even beyond what's being taught in the books, it's the attitude of the teachers themselves. And there is reservation and discrimination even among teachers. We know there are instances where Dalit professors are not given promotions. Dalit professors are not hired. They are not allowed to rise to certain ranks. There is so much discrimination in universities in India within teaching that it's hard for Dalit teachers, Dalit professors, Adivasi teachers and professors to even make themselves heard. So it's like, like I've been saying, this is a systemic issue that needs to be highlighted in a really big way.
Okay, so you talked about awareness. In this right now, in 21st century, social media has become a public platform where everyone express their views and opinions. And recently, the upper caste celebrities like Ravindra Jadeja and Kangana Ranaut and others, made some remarks which are very ill informed and they have been criticized for the same. How you see the social media as a whole in building the awareness about caste struggle in India, and has it helped us in educating people, arousing our awareness and bringing about harmony among Indian citizens, or it has aggravated the whole issue and brought about some kind of divide in Indian social fabric? Uh,
Subodh, you asked a great question because I want to address the last part of what you said, harmony and social fabric and bringing Indians together. I think this is an argument that a lot of upper caste people use, a lot of casteist people use, in order to stop us from speaking about our issues, from speaking about our rights. This is a very classic, tried and tested textbook case where people who are in power, when they don't want to let go of that power, when they don't want equality in the society, they use this argument to say, oh, by talking about your differences, by talking about how we are hurting you, by talking about how we have harmed you for thousands of years, you are creating disharmony and discord in the society, which I think is a completely bollock statement. I mean, if you're in a situation where you're being hurt, you are supposed to talk about it. If it creates disharmony, then the disharmony was already there. You talking about it is not creating disharmony. You talking about it is calling attention to the pain that you are suffering so you can create support around it. And that's what social media has done. In fact, social media has been very instrumental for Dalits in creating a voice of our own. Pre-social media, in early 2000s, in the 90s, the whole media circuit, the bureaucracy circuit, justice system, everything was controlled by upper caste people. So when the reservation debates happened, the only point of view that we saw was what upper caste editors thought. We didn't see a Dalit point of view because there were no Dalit journalists who were operating at that level at that time. Now the difference is that we have visibly vocal Dalit people who are there and raising their voice and educating people about issues. The fact that Jadeja or Kangana Ranaut have made these statements and the fact that they're being held accountable is a positive step, because 10 years ago, they would have made these statements and everybody would just agree with them and say, yeah, they're right. There's nothing wrong in what they said. Now there is a conscious awareness where we can hold them accountable and say, hold on, that's not right. You just cannot say that and get away with it. Now the Dalit public is empowered because they have a voice that we didn't have for such a long time. So in my opinion, like for example, take my opinion. The reason I had a book deal is because I wrote a Facebook note that went viral online. The reason I wrote a Facebook note is because I read Rohit Vemula's wonderful last letter. And I would have never read that if there was no internet, because I wouldn't even know that a bright, brilliant, talented person like that existed, fought for his rights, and was forced to give up his life. The reason that we have this ecosystem is because of the internet. And of course, like every other technological advancement, there are drawbacks. But let's not say that it is creating discord in the Indian society. What it is doing is giving Dalit people a voice to talk about their problems, to talk about their issues, and to talk about our rights, to talk about equal rights. That's what social media has given to us, and it is an extremely powerful tool, in my opinion.
All right. So for the final question, I had previously decided that I would ask the question that always ends up occurring and is unavoidable whenever we discuss caste. That is about economically privileged and well-off Dalits and reserved category students getting reservation. But I would not ask this question because you have already mentioned previously that that is something you do not want to address, and there is enough literature already.
I want to say, not that I don't want to address.
Yeah, but
I have addressed it so many times that in my opinion, it's a conversation not even worth having anymore. How many times do we have to tell people that we exist and our humanity matters and their discrimination matters? How many times do we have to convince them that I'm a human being who's suffering discrimination, whether I have a little money in my pocket or not, and that my caste didn't just simply go away just because I got a decently paying job?
Yeah,
That's not
but
something that we need to constantly keep talking about, at least in this forum. I think it's time for us to discuss something a little above and beyond that. I'm not saying it's an irrelevant conversation, because this is something that's being discussed right now. But personally, I have spoken so often about it. I've been speaking about it for 3 years, constantly. I would like to speak about something else. For people who want to know what my opinions are on this, you're welcome to check my previous interviews. You're welcome to read Coming Out as Dalit. There is a whole chapter on that.
But
So, yeah.
I want to ask something related to this topic. If we believe that even economically privileged Dalits face discrimination, which is a reality, but tell me, if we continue to have reservation for economically privileged SC/ST students, and then don't we believe in a notion that castes in India are inherently antagonistic, and this is never going to end? We will never be able to achieve the dream of Ambedkar of annihilating caste in India, because the fact that we insist that we have to have reservation even after Dalits achieve money in their hands, we have to have reservation for proper representation, goes on to say that we believe that there is no future of a casteless society in India. And also, like, you might have also experienced it personally in your life, that now you're a well-known journalist, you have authored a book, and I'm sure, like, this is something that I speak from a personal level, being a ST student myself. So I hope that you won't misinterpret my intention anywhere. So
Absolutely not.
yeah. So now that you've attained a certain level of success, I'm sure that you're not being discriminated as much as you were back when you were in school. And moreover, if a casteist person makes some remarks or says something, how does it stop us from studying or scoring well or doing what we want? So if this policy is going to continue, and if we are going to staunchly believe that caste is not going to go away, then how are we going to achieve Ambedkar's dream of annihilating caste? Isn't it a hopeless future?
This is really complex question, and bear with me while I unpack everything you asked. So, first, what you're saying is Ambedkar's vision of achieving a casteless society. By continuing reservation, we are not achieving that because of this remedy that has been given to us. So I just want to ask a question. Imagine yourself in the middle of a battlefield, right? We're all in the middle of a battlefield. We are being hacked left, right, and center, and there are people who are coming and bandaging us. And is it right that we ask people, stop bandaging us, because by treating me, by making me feel better, you are continuing to hurt me, you are continuing this war. If you keep treating me, then there is no way of us ending this war. That's the same analogy that we're looking at it. If we're on a battlefield, if we're in the middle of a place where we're being hacked, where our legs are being cut, where our arms are being cut, where our fingers and heads are being chopped, and then there is a little hope or a sliver, there's a little hospital, if you want to damage that hospital, because that hospital is the symbol of war, then we are not really looking at the entire picture. That is the analogy that we are thinking about. Reservation is a remedy. Reservation is not the cause. The cause is the power that is disproportionately held by upper caste people. Look at media, look at bureaucracy, look at judiciary. We have one token president who's from an SC category, who we all know, let's be very honest, Mr. President doesn't have a lot of power. So he doesn't really, where are the Dalits in judiciary? Who are the Dalit editors who are making decisions about what the narrative on India should look like? Who are the Dalit judges who are making decisions about laws that concern Dalits? Let's first talk about having Dalits in positions of power, and then we can look at the remedy. Let's understand, it's been 70 years. It's been 70, 75 years of reservation continuing. The reservation that upper castes have had has gone on for thousands of years. The reservation of owning land. Land has been passed down for centuries and family. Maybe they should give up the land reservation, and then casteism and a caste society can be achieved. Maybe they should give up their cultural reservation. Then, there have been families who exist in Delhi whose forefathers, whose great-grandfathers studied in London, whose great-grandfathers went to South Africa to study. They already have that cultural capital. They already have that cultural privilege. Maybe we should ask them to give that up before we attack this small and only, may I add, remedy that 1.2 billion people 25% of 1.2 billion people have. All Dalits have in this country is the constitutional reservation and the untouchability law. We really have no other ways to raise awareness about, and of course the SC/ST POA Act. We have no other ways to raise awareness about caste discrimination and casteism. Why is reservation in public schools, in public universities, in public government jobs, such a big issue that we are willing to ignore the absence of Dalits from every other sector in the society? Why is this small constitutional reservation the flashpoint of Dalit rights when Dalits are still being killed, when Dalits are still being harmed, when Dalit men are actively hacked to death for daring to marry somebody outside their caste, when Dalit women are continuously raped for their caste because they're considered more sexually available? How is this issue more important than the life and death of Dalit people, than the life and death of Adivasi people? So let's be real and understand what is being made into an issue, and what really is important is economic and constitutional reservation, which, let's be very clear, is a very small part of the pie, more important than the ongoing atrocities against Dalits. We're still at the stage where we're convincing people that casteism exists. Yeah. And on the same level, we want to take away the reservation that, we have to be on one side. Either you believe there is casteism and then take away reservation, or you just take away reservation and just, you leave the reservation intact and do something to change the way things are. Give power to Dalit people, we will not need reservation anymore. Until then, until there is the only way that we have to get into schools and colleges and universities, which is constitutional reservation, until we don't have any power, that's the only way for us to thrive and survive. Even now, Dalit students, Dalit professors, people who are first generation, second generation college goers, face an immense amount of discrimination. The only protection that they have is constitutional reservation. You take that away, forget Dalit students being in any schools and universities. Their numbers are already dwindling. So let's focus on what's really important. Let's see why this one issue is the only issue that, the 25% of this country's population can talk about. Why is it that this is the only thing? And why is it that when there is a really tiny number of economically privileged Dalits, they become the poster children for everything, whereas the whole other population is really can be ignored? Just because one Dalit person is relatively well off, why does that bother the caste pride of people so much that they want to attack them and take that away from them and say, oh, now you don't face any discrimination, when at the same time, the struggles that they have had and everything that they've had to do to get to that point are completely invalidated. Speaking about me, of course I don't face any discrimination now because I live in the US. If I went to an Indian community within the United States, I will not be allowed to enter a temple. Do you think if I went to an upper caste Brahmin's house, they will allow me to come and sit at the table and have dinner with them? Do you think they will give me the same kind of respect? Do you think they will not say, do you bathe enough? Are you clean enough? Did you wash your hands enough? Do you think they're going to give me the same kind of crockery, pots and pans, tables, plates that they give to the other upper caste students? Absolutely not. I will still face discrimination. And that is a human rights issue. That is an equality issue. Just because I have this relative privilege that everybody can see because I live in New York doesn't mean that it is okay for me to be discriminated. And I will be. The reason I'm not is because I'm not friends with many Indians. I only hang out with the Ambedkarite people and non-Indians. So discrimination looks different because casteism evolves. That doesn't mean it goes away. And that's what we need to address. Instead of saying, oh, you have one bandage, let's take it away and keep suffering because we want the casteless dream. I don't think that's what Ambedkar envisioned. He really believed maybe that with more Dalits converting to Buddhism, with more Dalits leaving Hinduism, we would be able to achieve some sort of equality. As we've seen, societies don't evolve that way. Societies take their time to evolve, and what's important is to question these fundamental ideas of who's controlling the entire power in the country, who's making constitutional reservation the only topic to talk about. Why is that the only topic we want to talk about and not Dalit atrocities and rapes?
Yeah, and one important thing that you've pointed out during the whole answer is the fact that whenever upper caste people talk about caste, their only sole concern is reservation. They rarely ever care to talk about, atrocities that Dalit people go through. So that's really important, and it is a
For them, atrocities don't even exist.
Yeah.
For them, the only issue that exists is reservation, and they will still continue to call us talentless and meritless. That is not a problem to them. They will say we are grabbing reservation, but at the same time we are also meritless. So make it make sense. It really doesn't make any sense. This argument is hoary and hollow and shallow and stupid. But it keeps coming up because that's the only way to beat Dalit people down with a stick, to beat Adivasi people down and make them feel inferior. Yeah. And that's why we only talk about reservation and nothing else.
Yeah. You also mentioned earlier that we have to, constantly make them realize that caste is something that still exists and has not gone away. And I feel very, sorry to tell you that there are discourses developing in the right-wing intellectual arena which claims that caste is not really Indian. It is a British invention which was gradually invented during the lordship of Lord Weasley when he was the Viceroy of India. So such discourses and such dialogue, and this is something that is not being said by Twitter trolls. It is something that is being done in proper seminars with professors who've studied from foreign universities, upper caste professors who've studied from foreign universities, and they have these organizations and they impart this education that they're trying to break India. Caste is not our thing, it is a British invention. So that's sad.
I mean, this is not news to me because I live in the US and I do roam in these circuits, and I'm fully aware of how this complex has gone on. Think about it. There are so many upper caste professors who are in the US, in the UK, in Germany, South Africa, all across the world. Why is it that the rest of the world doesn't know about caste? Why is it that the rest of the world, which is aware of racism as the subject of brutality, does not consider caste important? Because these people have made them believe that caste is not important. That's what the issue is. They've made them believe this is a whole industry, this is a whole complex where upper caste professors have created this theory that caste is a British invention, which of course is patently false. Of course, the British had a huge role in the way caste is seen today. But did they bring caste to the subcontinent? Absolutely not. My ancestors were Bhangi before British came in.
Yeah.
And they've been Bhangi since. In fact, one could argue that British intervention was the only way somebody from my caste had the opportunity to go to a school. Because if it was left to the casteist power lords and overlords that existed in India, somebody like me or my family would never have an opportunity to set foot inside a school. So this is a whole industrial complex that exists where all over the world, where these so-called professors who are deeply casteist, who are deeply wrong, and who are deeply flawed in their argument and ideology, go around and say that British invented caste. And of course, that's a completely biased point of view. And let's be very clear, right-wing and intellectual doesn't really go together anymore, does it? So let's not give credence or importance to what they're saying. Of course, they still have a platform, but we have more than enough Dalit professors, Dalit intellectuals who are now abroad, who are now in these spaces, who are challenging that argument and saying, what the hell are you talking about? This is not even the reality. You've constructed and created this web of lies for 70 years, and people have bought this. But it's time to break that, and it's time for you to shut the hell up.
Yeah. So, Yashika, ma'am, this brings us to the end of this wonderful interview, and we actually had a very enriching conversation with you, and we definitely hope that our readers and viewers of this interview will learn a lot from what you said today and from your experience being a Dalit and finally coming out as one. And thank you so much for adding strength to the cause that Rohit Vemula died for. And I would also like to thank you on behalf of every Dalit student for amplifying their voice and extending the discourse regarding discrimination and targeting every subtle form of discrimination that exists in this country, no matter how small, no matter how subtle. So thank you so much. And
Really appreciate it.
I hope
Thank
you
you,
had a
ma'am.
great time as well.
Thank you for your excellent questions. I am always happy to speak to Dalit students and Adivasi students. I think the real conversations come out of there. The real conversations don't come out of us talking to upper caste people and trying to convince them what our issues are. The real conversations happen here, and I'm so fortunate and deeply honored to be a part of this. And thank you for Shubodh and Ria, both of you, for bringing these wonderful questions. It was such a great time talking to you, and I'm really hoping we can do this again. Thank you.